My name is Catherine Suarez-Basson, and welcome to another session in our Proline Academy series for Strata Council members. I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline, and am setting the stage for this session, giving you a little bit of start out information. Then I'll hand it over to Kristy and Dario to get into the good stuff that you're here for. Speaking of which, I'll just introduce our representatives before we start. So we have Kristy Tamburri. You can see her on screen there. She's one of our Strata Property Managers and one of our managing brokers. She's been with Proline for over 10 years. And Dario Anselmo is also a Strata Property Manager, and he recently celebrated his 5-year anniversary here at Proline. So welcome to both of them. You'll hear lots from them today. We also have Dane from IT on the chat if anyone has technical difficulties, and Jan from accounting for extra support if there's questions that she can help with at the end. Our plan is for the presentation to take about 40 minutes and to have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end. If you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A feature. I see there's already one question up there, so we will work through those as they continue along. Also, please note that today's session is being recorded, as you may have heard, and we will let's try that again. We will be sending out a link to everyone who is registered for the session probably early next week once it's processed, and it'll be available on our YouTube channel as well, so people can always go there. A little bit more from me before we jump in. I wanted to introduce you to a few of our Academy resources. So we offer a number of different opportunities for learning, both for Strata Council members and for residents and owners in our Strata communities. We really want to help people understand these worlds in which they reside and have leadership roles, and help you fill those roles as best you can with the most information and support that we can provide. We do virtual lunch and learn, so those are opportunities for council members to hear directly from service providers and professionals and to learn more about specific items that impact your stratas. Our Academy sessions, like today's session, are presented by our own property managers and team members, and they dive deeper into specifics around how stratas and communities function. They're geared to councils and also sometimes to community members, depending on the topics. We also have our Strata Council Manual, which is available in the Council Only folder on your websites, your Strata website. That document is long and scintillating reading. I'm sure that many people just sit at home and read it in the evening for entertainment. It's also got a wealth of information on a broad variety of topics, and you can refer to it if you have a specific question about something, say bylaws or maintenance or how council meetings work. And it has great information there, so you can go to it when you have a question. We also publish a quarterly newsletter that has different features in it, and some industry insights and news. We've also highlighted a lot of charitable organizations that do great work in our communities. So that one will be coming out in March. This year, we are planning a return to 2 in-person sessions. If you're with us prior to the pandemic, you'll know that we like to bring people together in real life. And so we are excited to be planning something that hasn't been around for quite a long time. And we'll have more details that'll come on those. The first one we're planning for June, and there'll be more details in March, in the March newsletter. If you have any suggestions or questions regarding these educational offerings in our Proline Academy, as always, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to get more insights into what would benefit you and your community. And now I am going to be quiet and hand it over to Kristy and Dario to dive into the topic of Strata financial statements.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So today we're going to be reviewing Proline's basic accounting processes so that you have a better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. We want you to be able to understand these background processes so that when you hear about them, when you hear the property managers talking about them, you know what's happening. And we're also going to be looking at how your invoices are paid, and particularly breaking down the financial statements that you're provided on the 9th of each month so that you can make sense of them and translate the abstract numbers into a clear story about your strata, and also hopefully allow you to take more of an active role in your own strata's financial planning. So first, let's take a look at the people and processes behind the scenes, the things you don't necessarily know about, things that aren't represented on the operating statements or the reports, but knowledge of which will hopefully give you more important context for all the important parts in the accounting process. So first, I'd really like to highlight that we have a whole team working in our accounting department. It can be easy to just get the sense that the property manager who comes to your council meetings is the only person dedicated to the running of your strata. But we have an entire team here working behind the scenes, and accounting with 11 employees right now is just one of those. Personally, I feel very fortunate to work for a brokerage with a professional and in some cases chartered professional accountants who assist me, when I'm preparing the budgets for the stratas that I specifically work with. Some brokerages don't, and I just want to highlight again the wonderful team we have. We also have Jan here, one of our accountants, who will help us answer any questions about our accounting processes at the end of this presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Dario. So continuing the theme, talking about behind the scenes, we thought it would be an interesting opportunity to give some perspective on the volume that kind of goes through the accounting department here at Proline. So looking at these figures on a monthly basis, we process almost 12,000 pre-authorized debit payments, which is incredible. We're processing over 2,200 checks and online payments in a month. And then we're also going through and processing over 3,000 invoices a month for all of our Strata Corporation clients. So just to give you an idea of kind of the volume of what is going through the accounting team and through your property manager. So in terms of Proline's approach to accounting, we do use a cash-based accounting system. And the reason that we take this approach is it is the most widely understood way of managing a Strata Corporation's finances because it mimics the way people typically handle their own money. And so when we're talking about cash-based accounting, essentially cash in and out of the Strata Corporation's accounts are reported in real time when that money is actually moving, as opposed to accrual-based accounting. So that's an important note to make, specifically as it relates to your Strata Corporation's accounting. We also, kind of going back to the numbers, seeing that massive volume of accounting documentation being processed on a monthly basis. We have efficiencies and standardizations that we've developed over the years to ensure our consistency across all Strata corporations. We are extremely process driven, and that's to ensure those efficiencies so that we can make our way through that volume. Consistency is essentially key to accuracy, and we maintain that consistency through standardizations. We do use a chart of standard accounts to ensure consistency across all of the Strata corporations we manage. And so while the chart of accounts that one Strata corporation uses might be a little bit different than another Strata corporation, depending on the makeup of your strata, but ultimately the accounts remain the same. So for example, the water invoice that one Strata corporation receives and pays gets allocated to water and sewer, and that's the same account that we would put those same costs through for another Strata corporation. We also have a long-standing relationship with BMO, and so all of our Strata corporation clients funds are maintained through BMO accounts, and that again is to help us with our efficiencies to ensure that we can move through that volume to get you your operating statements on a timely basis. We also have a number of controls behind the scenes to ensure that not only we are maintaining those consistencies and efficiencies, but also so that we are doing things accurately and confidently. Strata management is regulated by the BC Financial Services Authority, and there are very specific regulations that we must follow to ensure that our strata clients are protected and receive financial information in a timely manner. One of those controls specifically is an annual audit. This is a regulatory requirement and basically is a professional audit of a random sampling of our strata clients' records. And once that audit is completed, it's a private confidential document, so we don't share the results or the actual audit itself, but all clients are assessed an annual audit fee to help recover the costs for that work. I do want to specifically highlight at this point Kathy Sotart. She is one of our owners, and she's also our accountant responsible for strategy and compliance. So she works closely with our managing brokers to ensure that all regulations are being met all of the time and that we stay out of real estate jail. I also wanted to touch on check runs specifically, because check runs have a number of checks and balances in the process to ensure that invoices that are received are coded, reviewed, approved, and paid accurately and correctly. And that's a really, really important part of the system, because the number of accounting professionals and your property manager get involved in that process. And we put a lot of effort into ensuring that those invoices, are coded correctly and paid appropriately. So having said all of that, we're now going to move on to more of the nitty-gritty of the Strata Corporation's money.
Great. So let's think about how your strata operates on the most basic level. First, you need money. How do you get money? The main source of income is, of course, strata fees. There are some other income sources, which we'll touch on in a minute, but mostly strata fees. Those strata fees are collected through our accounts receivable process. And this is one of the unsung processes of running strata. We process thousands and thousands and thousands of payments every month, tracking each unit's payments and charges and following up on any arrears. Then, of course, the question is, what do you do with your money? And normally you're using it to pay your bills through our accounts payable process. And finally, how do we take all those numbers and turn them into practical use to explain the story of your strata and its money? We do that through the accounting statements. So talking about income first, as I stated, strata fees are usually the main source of income. And now normally when we're building budgets, we kind of arrive at the strata fees by working backwards. We're not setting a desired level of strata fees and then building the budget from there. We're building the ideal budget for your strata and then calculating the strata fee rate that it would take to achieve that budget. Now, strata fees are split between your two main bank accounts, the operating and the contingency reserve fund. For practical purposes, we collect this as one strata fee payment from the owners into the operating account. And then we do the work on our end to divide it up and make automatic monthly payments from the operating fund into the contingency reserve fund to match the amount that was budgeted. In our strata fee schedules that owners get, we break it out, but that's why we just collect the one lump sum payment, and we show in that same schedule what owners need to make for the one lump sum payment to go into the two different accounts. Of course, there are other ways of gaining funds. You can raise money via special levy, and that money will be put into essentially a third separate bank account. Those funds can only be used for the specific projects the levy was intended for. We, Proline, do charge a small fee for special levies. It's something like $10 per unit. That's because we need to dedicate hours of our time for each levy to open the bank account, manage the payments, follow up on the arrears, produce additional reporting statements. And we're going to talk about that more in a bit. Not on this slide, but of course, there are smaller ways for stratas to earn money through user fees and rent of common property, such as charging for parking spaces, guest suites. But the final big area is interest. As Kristy already noted, we have a standard deal with BMO to have the CRF earning interest at whatever the prime rate is, minus a little less than 2%. So it requires a little bit of thinking and math, but for the past year or so, the prime rate has been especially high at 7.2. So for all the stratas we manage, everyone's been earning income on their CRF at a little less than 5.3%. We have a pretty standard process for arrears, which we follow studiously. When a unit is 1 month in arrears, we send them a friendly reminder letter. At the 2-month mark, we send a less friendly reminder letter. These are sent by email and or in the mail, depending on the contact information we have. And at about a 3-month mark, that's when we're going to start looking at council for direction on what you'd like us to do. Stratas can send units to collections for unpaid strata fees. You can also put a lien on the unit. Sending a unit to collections is at no cost to the strata. The lawyer's fees there are added to what the unit owner owes. That being said, it's usually often more beneficial for everyone involved to find out why the owner isn't paying their strata fees and come up with a plan with them. Even when we have council's direction to send a unit to collections, we never do it without making at least one attempt to get the owner on the phone with us. Often, they would rather just pay the strata than have to go through the collections process, and hopefully we can come up with a reasoning for that. So to summarize, usually in a council meeting, we're going to ask you for direction on what you'd like to do with anyone who is 3 months in arrears or more. But if someone's just 1 or 2 months in arrears, we're sending them reminder letters. We're not waiting to talk to you about it first. We're not waiting for the next council meeting. We're proactively reaching out to those units to remind them and to get them to collect those unpaid fees. So that's income, but let's quickly look at the payables process, the money going out of your strata. Again, usually to pay invoices for contractors, utilities, your insurance premiums. For the last 4-ish years, we've used a system that we call the paid system. This is an amazing system that we've developed internally that has improved efficiencies by moving as much of the process electronically as possible. Invoices get sent to payables@prolinemanagement.com. A lot of contractors that we work with have that email address, but also your property manager can forward invoices to that email address. All the invoices sent to that email address get uploaded into our paid website where they're allocated to the appropriate line item on your budget. Your property manager then reviews them, they make sure that they're allocated appropriately, then we'll approve the invoice, reject it, put it on hold if it needs to be on hold. Any edits that need to be made before it gets sent back to the payables team. Then 3 times a month, what we call our check runs, the payables team takes the approved invoices and makes the payments, traditionally by mailing a physical check, but more and more we've been getting contractors set up for online payments through the system, which is great for both you and the contractors, gets them paid faster, cuts down on waste like paper, cuts down on postage fees for the strata, and the contractors are obviously usually happier to work with you when they get their payments immediately as well. Some councils have opted on to take on the responsibility for reviewing and approving invoices themselves through the system. Not many, because doing so means that you as council are now 100% responsible for ensuring your invoices are approved on time and are assigned correctly in your budget. That's something that we are very, very willing to take on for you. But if you're interested in being more in control about that, talk to your property manager about it. We're currently working as well on options for Strata for councils to see inside the paid system, just to be able to look and see the invoices. I don't think we fully have that yet, but again, it's a system that's only 4 years old and we're developing it internally. So new features are getting added all the time, and we're definitely continuing to look to expand it. So that's the process, how the money comes in and out. Again, those are the background processes. Now we'll turn to the operating statements, and that's the reports we send out to you, so you can hopefully make sense of all this. And so I'll turn it back to Kristy to start talking about that.
Perfect. So we talked about the 2 kinds of accounts that strata corporations must maintain, the operating and the contingency reserve fund. Now we're going to break it down further and specifically look at the monthly statements, starting with the operating fund. So if we're looking at the monthly operating fund statement, you'll see that every page has 5 columns at the top. The first column, which is circled on the screen here, is the current actual. So that's going to show all of the current expenses. In this specific example, this is from November 30th, 2023 for sample strata, VIS 1234. So that's going to be expenses specifically incurred in that month. The next column is the year-to-date actual. So that is going to show us the total amount spent year to date for your fiscal year in each line. And that's really handy to kind of get an idea of exactly where you're at in the middle of a fiscal year to see how much of a budget you have remaining. The next column is your annual budget, which is a very important piece of the puzzle when we're looking at these statements to confirm exactly where we are in the middle of a fiscal year. The next column is last year's year to date. This is a neat column to provide a little bit more perspective in terms of where the Strata Corporation is at a snapshot point in time compared to the previous fiscal year. So it's a neat opportunity to kind of compare 2 years at once based on one point in the fiscal year. And then lastly, we have the percentage budget used. This is a really quick and dirty way to take a peek down that last column to see exactly where you're at percentage-wise based on any line item in the fiscal year. So for example, if we're looking at the hydro there, the first line item under the building common area, we were sitting at just under 59% overall for hydro costs. So it's just a quick and dirty way to check exactly where you're at. So on to the next section, we're going to specifically hone in on the income. So for every Strata Corporation, this may look a little bit different because, of course, you may be collecting different kinds of income. But everyone's going to be collecting strata assessments. So that's the income that the Strata Corporation receives through those strata fee payments. You may have move in and out fees that you collect for the Strata Corporation. You may also potentially have an interest-bearing operating account. So you may have an interest income line as well in your operating fund statement. There are other income lines that you may see, again, depending on your Strata Corporation. It could be, as Dario had pointed out, you could have a guest suite, so you could have guest suite rental income. You could have storage locker income, parking income. There's a variety of different lines. But lastly, you may also have an other income line. That other income line typically holds income that the Strata Corporation receives related to fines, the purchasing of fobs and keys, or other income, miscellaneous income that doesn't fall under the other income lines that you have within your budget. The next section of the operating statement for the operating fund is your operating expenses building common area. And so this is really the meat and potatoes of the Strata Corporation's operating budget. Again, depending on your Strata Corporation, the type of property that you have, your budget might look a lot different from the Strata Corporation next door to you. But these, as we talked about before, these categories or these line items are general accounting codes that we use consistently across all Strata Corporations to ensure consistency within the system and within the Strata Corporation portfolio. So again, those may change depending on what is within your Strata Corporation. You may not have an elevator, for example, so you're not going to see an elevator line on your budget and your operating statement. I will also note that if you have a types Strata Corporation, you may also see an additional section to the building common areas that is solely for one type of the Strata Corporation. So for example, you may have a townhouse type and a condo type where the condo type only exclusively pays for an elevator. So the elevator cost is going to be removed from this section and specifically reported for the condo type. Under the building common area section of the operating statement is where we find the administration costs. So typically speaking, you're going to see your property management fees here, admin and postage. So that generally covers the cost of supplies if you order any supplies for your strata. It covers copying, duplication, scanning, printing, mailing, postage. It also covers your StrataPress website. So that's where your website costs are going to be allocated to. Interest and bank charges are always the same. It's $25 with BMO per month, $300 a year gets each of our strata corporations that 12,000 pre-authorized payments per month. So that's a pretty awesome rate. In addition to those lines, you may have a professional fees budget. Typically, we see those specifically budgeted for legal advice or other professional guidance from engineers or the like. You may also have other lines under this section. Some strata corporations budget for a miscellaneous admin line or professional fees or dues. And if you have questions around other options under this section, please do reach out to your property manager and we can kind of talk about what options we have there. Under the administration section is other expenses. And so this is where the statement shows the transfer to the reserves from assessments. And so when you pay your strata fees, as Dario had mentioned, it's a one lump sum payment per month that then needs to be separated so that a portion stays in the operating fund and a portion is transferred to the contingency reserve fund. So this, under other expenses, that's where that transfer is shown. Where each month we move the assessment funds to the contingency reserve fund. Under that, you'll see in brackets loan from or repayments to the contingency reserve fund. In the event that your strata corporation has a hard time making payment of invoices in any given month, let's say you had your insurance premium at the forefront of your fiscal year and it's depleted your cash flow in your operating fund, you may need to take a loan from your contingency reserve fund to your operating fund in order to pay those invoices or to pay that premium. And so we reflect that loan under this section, under the other expenses section. And the loan is completely compliant with the Strata Property Act and is quite commonplace, particularly again for those strata corporations that have insurance premiums due at the forefront of their fiscal year. And as long as those loans get paid within the current fiscal year, it's absolutely permitted and, as I said, fairly common practice. So under that section, we have the summary, which is pretty self-explanatory, but the summary will show the total income collected for a month, and then the other respective columns, the total operating expenses. It reflects the cash flow for the month. The add balance forward bank is the opening balance. So it's the opening balance at the beginning of the month, and then the opening balance at the beginning of the fiscal year. Of course, we also include the transfer to the reserve surplus. So if your strata corporation has budgeted, you've collected a bunch of money in your operating fund and you want to move some of it over to the contingency reserve fund to save for that rainy day big capital expense, you can budget for a surplus transfer. And so that's that line there at the bottom, less transfer to reserve surplus. And then of course, at the very, very tail end of the operating fund statement, we have the closing balance bank, which shows exactly how much money you had at the end of November 30th, 2023 for this sample strata. Over to Dario. He's going to talk about that rainy day fund.
Yeah. So the contingency reserve fund, which is the second bank account that stratas are mandated to have, it's accounted for completely separately on the operating statement, and we'll take a look at that on the next slide. Now, Kristy's already done all the work for me explaining how this is laid out, because it's laid out the same way. The income and expenses for the month is in the current actual column. So $2,305 collected this month. For the year in the second column, and the total budgeted in the third column. We pay a lot more closer attention to the budget used percentage here, as unlike operating line items, each individual CRF item is not allowed to go over budget. If an invoice would put you over budget, what we usually do is in our paid system, get it broken down to pay as much as possible out of the CRF until we've maxed out that budget line item. And then the rest is going to be paid out of the appropriate line item in your operating account. I'll note about halfway down the page, you'll see interfund transfers. This is where we record loans from the contingency reserve fund into the operating account. So essentially, the Strata did not have enough in its operating account to pay its bills, probably its insurance premium. Almost every Strata I've dealt with over the last 3 years has had to borrow every year to pay its insurance premium. So the cost was paid out of the contingency reserve fund instead. We call it a loan because the Strata has to pay an equal amount back into the operating fund, or sorry, back from the operating fund into the CRF by the end of that fiscal year. So here's where we track how much has been loaned from the CRF to the operating and how much remains to be paid back. And that's the number you see in brackets, again, about halfway down the page out of the loan repayment to CRF. Thank you for the hovering the mouse around it there. And then any GICs also that your Strata has would be listed at the very bottom. There are no GICs on this statement, but they would be in the very bottom where it says held in BMO bank account. There would also be a line for held in investments. So that's the operating and CRF statements, but there are more pages, individual pages in your statement. So let's take a look at those. The next is a special levy. Obviously, this would only appear in your statements if the Strata had the special levy. Going to be a broken record at this point, but for simplicity, it's laid out the same way. Income and expenses for the month, then the year, then compared to the budget. Unlike with other accounts, the special levy, the goal of the special levy is to get it down to zero. Usually you don't want your CRF down at zero, but with the special levy, you're either going to spend all the funds on the project or any remaining funds are going to be refunded to owners, and then the page is going to disappear once the levy has been closed. If there are multiple payments, you can see there under income, it's the special levy March 2022. If you had owners paying some in March, then another payment in December, we would break those down by collection period on separate lines. This page is called the reconciled bank statement, and it's basically a summary of the exact amounts in your bank accounts as of 2 months ago. So to look at the timeline here, so on March 9th, this March 9th coming up, you're going to get the February operating statements, which is going to have all the financial information for February, except for this page, which is going to confirm the month end totals for January, so 2 months ago. Why do we do that? It's because we're required by the Real Estate Services Act to give you this reconciled bank statement, but they take time to get together with the bank. If we held up the rest of the statement until this was ready, we would need to significantly delay the release of this whole document. So we get the information we described above out to you when it's ready by the 9th, and then we get this out to you the next month to decrease the delay. And again, this is just the final confirmed numbers from the bank, what was in each of your bank accounts as of the last day of the previous month. All right, and then here at the back is one of the most interesting parts of your operating statement, and it's tucked way in the back, so don't miss it. This is quite simply a list of every invoice paid by the Strata in the past month. Now, you won't find this in the copy that gets sent out by email to every owner who's registered for the website. Only council members get to see this. So in order to see it, you have to go to the website, click on the council only folder on your website, and access the financials that you'll find in that folder. And they're always posted there by the 9th of the month. This is organized along with your budget. So it's usually in the same order your budget's in. So you're going to see everything paid out of the hydro line item in your budget in that first. Anything paid out of the plumbing and heating, anything paid out of building maintenance general, those are all going to be grouped together. And as you move along the line, you'll see that you've got the date of the invoice on the left, the date the payment was actually made, the name of the person or company that it was paid to, the amount, and a brief explanation of what the invoice paid for. So that is a look at front to back what the operating statements look like. And then Kristy's just going to talk a little bit about how we prepare those for you.
Absolutely. So I'm just quickly going to briefly go through our internal flow chart process for our Strata operating statements. So essentially our accounting department produces the draft statements. The draft statements go to your property manager. Your property manager reviews them, potentially provides feedback to accounting on any corrections or reallocations that need to occur. Accounting makes those changes where necessary, puts together the finalized operating statement, and then our admin team goes through, finalizes the document, puts a beautiful cover letter on there, and then posts that, as Dario said, on the 9th of the month to the council only folder. So it does go back and forth and through a number of people before it gets finalized. And again, that's one of the checks and balances in our system to ensure controls and accuracy of the documentation that we send out to you. So we've gone through the operating statement and kind of the financial services that Proline provides to strata corporations. How do we make sense of the details? We ultimately, the operating statement will provide an opportunity to pull all of the information together to tell the strata corporation story from a financial perspective. And we can kind of take that story and look at the bigger picture for the strata. And so the statement gives us an opportunity to obviously have a monthly view against an annual perspective for the strata corporation's financial performance. And it's also an opportunity to review where the strata is at any given time in the fiscal year. And then a terrific opportunity to really measure the strata corporation's financial performance against the approved budget. And this is kind of one of the reasons that we use cash-based accounting, because any council member can pull up an operating statement and really see exactly where the strata corporation is at financially at the end of every single month. The operating statements also provide an opportunity for a review of variances and understanding those variances. So essentially, why are things different in terms of expenses compared to what the budget was? And it gives the strata council good perspective in terms of whether or not the strata is doing better because a project had been delayed or because the project came under budget. It just gives good opportunity to take a peek at those variances and really discover what is going on. It also obviously gives important data and information for the strata council to look at to take action for the next budget. I did want to specifically mention that your property manager is trained and ready to help you and your strata council through the budgeting season. And so we also want to ensure the financial health of the strata corporation long-term. So generally speaking, budgeting for next year is typically a very collaborative process. It might look different from strata to strata depending on your council's preferences and your treasurer's preferences. But we do like to have a collaborative process and provide you with the advice and guidance that you need to ensure that you present a valid, successful budget for your upcoming annual general meeting. So that does it. That was a brief but very detailed overview of our operating statement and financial services for strata corporations. And this is our opportunity to address questions. So Catherine, I don't know if you have anything to add here before we jump right into the questions. If not, we can jump in, or I can hand you the floor.
I don't have anything. You're good to go. Jump right in.
Perfect. So the first question, and before we jump into the questions, I will say I think there are a couple of questions in the chat, and then there's a question in the actual question and answer section. Ideally, if you can put your questions in the Q&A section, that's great, but we will also try to address all of the questions in the chat as well. The first question is, why aren't all stratas audited on a yearly basis? How does a strata know how its audit went if results are not shared? To audit all of the strata corporations would be extensively expensive and significant. And the regulatory body only requires a sampling of strata records be audited specifically. We don't share the results of the audit because if the results were not positive, we would not retain our licensing. And so there is typically with an annual audit, there's a bunch of documentation that is submitted to BCFSA. They sometimes have questions, so there can be a bit of back and forth, but ultimately the audit comes and goes, and there isn't really anything to report on it. So that's why we typically don't share when it's happening or what the results are. Okay, so next, is it fair to say it's Proline that is being audited, not strata councils? Yes, that is absolutely fair to say, Andrew.
Late payment charges on invoices. It would depend on why the invoice was late. We generally try to work with our contractors to get those charges removed in the first place, especially when we've had the contractors had long-term relationships with them. If they were late because of an error on Proline's part, that's definitely something that we would be looking into. But usually it's different reasons, and hopefully we can work it out with the contractor. Do we want to get the questions that are in the chat?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's grab
those.
those.
Is cash-based accounting used by most property management companies? I don't know the exact ratio. Do you, Kristy?
I don't. I think it's a bit of a mix, though, for sure. There are other cash-based accounting brokerages, and there are brokerages that use accrual-based accounting.
Accounting is on a cash basis. How do we see the arrears then? Essentially, what you've detailed is correct. There's a second ledger that we can generate, which shows any late payments. We always list payments as being due on the first of the month, and then so any that are delayed would show up on a report that we run, and we can, we're happy to go through that report with our councils at any time.
Great. Pauline also asked, how would a rental suite fare under the new BC Strata Act in short-term rental? Pauline, I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
I think, if I may, I have heard some concerns that because the government is restricting short-term accommodations, that guest suites may count as a short-term accommodation. I'm not a lawyer, and I know that there has been a little bit of unclarity from lawyers I've spoken to about this. That being said, there are exceptions in the new law. For example, what is it called? Like side accommodations. Like you can have a short-term rental in your basement if you're living upstairs. And from the lawyers I've spoken to, they expect that there's going to be the similar, it counts as a secondary suite within the strata, essentially.
Thank you.
Kind of outside of this topic, but great question.
Suzanne also asked, what is accrual basis accounting? And so accrual accounting is an accounting method where revenue or expenses are recorded when a transaction occurs versus when payment is received or made.
How many stratas does Proline manage? What a great question. I don't remember off the top of my head.
220-ish, I think, somewhere around there.
The second part of the question was to explain cash-based accounting again, which I think the easiest way is we just report on the actual amount of money that you have. How much money actually came in this month, how much money actually went out the door this month, how much money is actually in your bank account this month. This would be, as we said, as Kristy just answered, as opposed to accrual where we would say, you know, you have $1,000, but actually you only have 500 because you owe 500 to this person, but that 500 is not going to be paid out for the next, 2 months from now. We don't do those calculations. We just show you exactly how much you have, literally the amount that you would see in your bank account, the same as if you were going to your personal bank account and just taking a look at how much money was in there. And the last part of the question was the Strata does not have a website. So how do owners get their monthly financial statements when they don't have a website? Kristy, do you?
You have a couple of options. If you don't have a website, you can set up a system whereby the operating statements are mailed. You can designate a council member to provide those on site. Typically, that would be particularly for a small strata, that would probably be the best bet. But it would be something that you would want to chat with your council about in terms of how best to get that statement, those statement details to owners, if that's how you want to go about it. Right. Duncan asks, at the end of a special levy, any funds remaining go back to owners. Can you confirm that the current owner, that is the current owner and not actually who paid the special levy? So Duncan, that is correct. It goes to the current owner. So sometimes what will happen if an owner is looking to sell their unit and a special levy has been paid and is anticipated to be refunded or a portion to be refunded, often owners will adjust for those costs in their closing of their strata lot. But ultimately that is between the current owner and the purchaser to sort out. We don't get involved in that at all. So if you have a special levy account and your council approves refunding owners, it would go to the owner on title at that time.
All right. Dave asks if an expense is incurred on an emergency basis and charged to the CRF, does council have to have a resolution to move the expense to the CRF, or can it be done as a resolution at the AGM? So it actually does not need to be done at an AGM. There are certain criteria in the Strata Property Act and regulations for what constitutes an emergency, but if it is an emergency, council can just decide, yeah, we're paying that out of the CRF. And it does not need approval from owners. That's the whole point of being able to charge things as an emergency. And generally, it's if there's going to be further damage to the property or perhaps danger to someone's, personal well-being, if you take the, 20, 30 days to set up an SGM to get approval from owners, if the roof collapses, you can't be like, well, I guess we got to plan for an SGM sometime in the next 2 months. You just go ahead. And I wouldn't mind answering the next one too from Emily. What's the process for changing the accounting line item that has an invoice has been assigned to? What is the timeline? Really quickly, first of all, like for me, just a bit of background, like for me, if I'm approving an invoice and that invoice has to go out today, and it's been assigned to the wrong line item, our accounting team, specifically Jeanette, who works in our accounting department, will change it in like 5 minutes. It's a very quick turnaround. If you have noticed a invoice has already been paid and you just want to move it to a different part of your budget, that's a little less time sensitive because the contractor's already been paid. We're just rearranging the numbers in your operating fund. And if we're going to do that, we're just going to get it changed out for the next month's operating statement. So if you see an invoice on your June operating statement and you're like, hey, I actually want that paid out of a different line item, then you'll probably see that show up on the February operating statement the next month.
Great. All right, Doris asks, is it necessary to go through Proline Manager to send information to the financial department? So typically we like for our Strata Council members to use their property manager as their point of contact. The property manager really is the conduit to the rest of the team. So if you have accounting and financial related questions, yes, the appropriate right step is definitely to have a conversation with your property manager, because a couple of different things can happen. Your property manager may already know the answer to your question and may be able to address it right away, or they may have to go to accounting, but can do that quickly, whereas they may need to loop in one of the accounting team members for further investigation and direct conversation with council members, but it is, I would say, probably pretty rare to have to need to go to that extent, but it is an option because we do have that team. But your first step is always to chat with your strata manager. Doris also asks, why does it take so long for some changes to be made? So not knowing obviously what the changes are, when they were requested. Some changes, as Dario had mentioned, are, it kind of fits into the time and ends up being serendipitous in terms of how we can make that change, and it can be made really quickly. Other times, we have to wait until the end of the month or when the draft operating statements are issued, or there may be other discussions and conversations that your strata manager may have to have with accounting. So it really depends on what the changes are, but we try to make any changes as painless and as quickly as we can.
An anonymous attendee asks, is there a dollar limit to the CRF amount that council can decide to pay on an emergency basis? So short answer, no. Whatever the repair, whatever the bill is, it is. But again, there is a framework for what counts as an emergency expense. An emergency expense can't just be council wanted to get this done really quickly and didn't want to bother setting up an SGM, and so you decided to go forward with it. But again, if your roof collapses, and like literally collapses, the Strata Property Act doesn't say, oh, well, that's going to be more than you would normally be allowed to spend under your budget, so you're not allowed to do it. If it's truly an emergency, you can spend as much out of your CRF as you need.
Great. And then just a bit of a duplicate. Can a council member meet with the accounting department? Is there a charge, or does it go through the strata manager? And again, your first step is with your strata manager. No, there's no extra charge to meet with accounting if it's necessary, but have the conversation with your strata manager first to kind of figure out what the best way to move forward is. What day of the month are statements sent out to council? And what day of the month to owners? So the council only version of the operating statement that contains that monthly disbursement data is always posted to the Strata Press council only folder no later than the 9th of each month. So for example, I believe March 9th is a Saturday. So for March, it would be posted by end of day. The February operating statement would be posted to Strata Press council only folder by end of day March 8th. The abbreviated operating statements that we post to the website for owners typically goes around the 15th of the month.
When are the 3 payment runs done? It's really going to depend on the month. We try to space them out pretty evenly. So it's going to be like, roughly every week and a half. But they're not on specific days. It depends on how the month is structured.
Typically, though, we do try to arrange for the first check run to be around the second business day of the month. So again, with the calendar and business days falling all over the place, it's not always consistent, but we try to aim for kind of the second business day. And then usually the mid-month falls around the 13th, 14th. And then typically the last check run is usually the 21st or 22nd of the month, depending on the month, depending on the weeks. And it looks like there are no other questions. So we'll give it a second. And I think Catherine has some closing remarks.
Thank you, Pauline, for being here.
excuse me, I'm not seeing anything else come through. So I'll talk for a second or two and see if anything else does come through. My closing remarks are just that reminder that we have recorded this and we will be sharing it to everybody who was registered. So if you wanted to go back and relook at a statement or look at your statement next to the session and make sense of what your statement is in relation to this information, you can do that. I anticipate that it'll be coming out to you early next week by email. There'll be a link in an email. And thank you for attending so much. We do appreciate that people are interested in learning and understanding more. For any Academy session questions about what kind of content you'd like to see, anything like that, my email's on the screen. You can always reach out to me. You can also send me other questions and I will just send them out to Kristy and Dario depending upon the content. So, or distribute them to your property manager because I'm not poised to answer every question for everything, but I'm happy to be a conduit for you. And unless anyone else has anything else, I think that we are finished. Yes,
Okay.
Kristy, Dario.
You betcha. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.